Hello and welcome to the Max MPS Radio. My name is Jan Frisse and today I'm honored to have Dr. Mike Israetel again on the podcast to continue where we actually left off. I'm currently in Vienna in the podcast room of Das Gym, living the bodybuilding dream life, I guess. And I'm just welcoming Mike again. And we will today discuss pretty much everything regarding metabolic stress and metabolite techniques. And we pretty much covered everything regarding straight sets last time, and so I'm definitely excited to dive into those. So hello and welcome, Mike. I'm glad that we could make the time again, or you made the time again to come to the Max MPS Radio, and just want to say thank you again and welcome you.
Thanks for having me again.
So basically we will just dive right into, we kind of left it off with, we pretty much covered all the straight sets, so I will start off the podcast today with the question, I think a pretty basic question, but that will cover a good amount of general things regarding metabolic stress and giving maybe some people that don't really know what it is exactly a good introduction. So what exactly is metabolic stress, Mike, and where would you place its importance in contrast to mechanical tension and hypertrophy training?
That's a good question. I don't think the scientific community is quite very certain about that. I don't know if it's metabolic stress that causes adaptations. We have some good research from animal models and some human stuff that metabolites themselves, such as lactate and high concentrations, trigger growth responses. The presence of those metabolites sure feels stressful. I don't know if I'd call it stress. I don't know if they're damaging anything necessarily. But so metabolites can enhance the hypertrophic response in at least two ways potentially. One is they can directly stimulate hypertrophy, which has been shown a few times now. It's not enough studies to be real certain, but it's certainly curious. And there's an intersection of the kinds of training that cause metabolites and to sequester or to accumulate in the muscle, and also the kind of training that's hypertrophic. So it certainly wouldn't surprise anybody or most people that metabolites can have direct hypertrophic signaling effects. On the other hand, the other way through which metabolite training or which metabolite accumulation can cause hypertrophy is that it can significantly fatigue the muscle and the whole muscle, which requires faster twitch, larger motor units to turn on more than they usually would at a certain given load. And because of that excess fatigue locally at the muscular level, the enhanced recruitment of those and tension provided through those larger, faster motor units can cause them to grow where they may otherwise not grow with such small loads. So by allowing metabolites to push somebody closer to failure, those metabolites can then create a situation where we have to turn on and generate tension through our faster, larger motor units, and those tend to be the more growth-prone motor units, not the only growth-prone motor units, but more growth-prone. And that probably is at least a big part of the effect of metabolite-style training. And when people at home think of what the hell is metabolite-style training, the easy answer is anything that gives you a burn in the muscle locally. Like when you have a burn, that is the detection of metabolites at nerve cells. And then when you have a burn, a couple other things come with it as well, probably. And those are the two main ones: a potential direct metabolite effect on hypertrophy, which some people say is not. It's an interesting idea. Some people say tension is the only modulator of hypertrophy, because they say it's not required to invoke metabolites, but that's not exactly how logic works. Tension could hypothetically be the only thing, but if there's direct evidence for metabolites, that kind of rules out the need to speculate that tension is the only thing that has to be there. So it's probably a combination of factors, would be my bet, but maybe not. And then, of course, tension is a very big part, and metabolites still allow for tension to be a primary mechanism by creating local fatigue. It comes with some problems of its own we can talk about later.
Yeah, and I'm definitely looking forward how the research is actually evolving in that sense.
Sure.
Probably over the next few years, maybe decades. Yeah, Mike, um, let's dive right into the first one. And I think we kind of left it off with all these straight set stuff. We finished with slower eccentrics and paused. And I think the next one will be giant sets. So, yeah, basically just explain what is a giant set, and then maybe or we will continue with Myo Reps, drop sets, and supersets.
Yeah, hilariously, giant sets are not a metabolite technique, so but we'll include them nonetheless because they are a very interesting way to train that especially comes in handy in certain special circumstances. There are at least two circumstances in which giant sets can be very useful. One, so what are giant sets really quick? Giant sets is when you have a certain number of reps to hit total, and you use an exercise to do as many sets as it takes to hit that total number of reps. And sets behave relatively normally. Whatever RIR you want to go to is fine. You basically just crank out as many sets as it takes to get to the total. So, for example, you start dumbbell curls with the 20-pound dumbbells. You say, I'm going to do 60 total repetitions, and we'll see how many sets it takes me to get there, and I'm going to do each set at roughly 2 reps in reserve, something like that. And so maybe it takes you 5 sets, maybe it takes you 4, who knows, right? So you'd think, okay, that's an interesting way to do things. Why not just do 5 or 4 sets? Well, 2 things potentially. One is giant sets can be a really good way to train when you can't increase the weight week to week. So you just increase the total set number week to week. And then what that does is it allows you to use the same weights over and over and over because there's not a huge increment, or there's not a small increment by which to increase weights. For example, if you curl the 20s, that's like basically like doing squats with 200 kilos, the same if you multiply it by 10. If you go up to the 25s, that's like going up from 200 kilos in the squat from one week to 250 kilos the next week. Now, I'm not sure how strong people who squat 200 kilos have to be, for reps in order to jump to 250 and get roughly the same number of reps. I mean, that's insane. Your max would have to be 600 kilos or something for that to work, and there's nobody who squats that much. So just the same way, relatively speaking, if you're used to doing roughly sets of 10 with 20 pounds in the biceps curl, then if you go up by 5 pounds the next week to 25, which is usually the next increment at most gyms, you're going to be getting 3 or 4 reps. And then the next week you go up to 30, you're going to be getting 0 or 1 rep. And that kind of ends your progression right there. So instead of that, maybe we can do the 20s for 50 sets one week, 50 reps one week, 55 reps the next week, 60 reps the week after that, 65 reps the week after that. And then next mesocycle, maybe we'll play around with the 25s, right? So that's a potential use. The astute observer will immediately understand that you actually don't have to do giant sets to do that. You can just go up by reps every week. So you can do straight sets, but instead of increasing weight, you can go up by reps. So you do sets of roughly 10 reps on average for week 1, roughly 11 reps for week 2, 12 reps for week 3, so on and so forth. And then eventually you're up to sets of 15. And then maybe you can go up to the 25s and go back down to 8 sets and then restart the progression. So that's totally fine. So giant sets are not required. So here's where giant sets come in really, really handy. And it's the following. When you want an exercise to be plenty of volume and enough hypertrophic stimulus, but you want to focus on the technique, specifically the mind-muscle connection, to increase your stimulus to fatigue ratio on that exercise for potentially later using it not as a giant set, but in conventional programming. For example, if you are really trying to do lat pull downs to focus on your lats, for many people that's totally fine and they can't help but focus on their lats. But for other people, quite a few people, sometimes your forearms seem to take over and accumulate more lactate than your lats do, or your biceps. Sometimes you're so concerned with getting the bar down to your chest and hitting a certain number of reps every single time that you lose the mind-muscle connection in your lats, and you're just back to just kind of doing the exercise. The thing is, like, for a lot of pressing movements, the mind-muscle connection is hard to avoid if you get the reps that you get. Like your leg press, you just go all the way down and all the way up. Your quads will get fucked up. You really just don't have a choice about it. But for complex exercises that require a lot of mind-muscle connection, like lat pull-downs, for example, possibly like side lateral raises and a variety of other exercises, you can see a situation in which if you have, because, for straight sets, you have a rep target every week, right? You have to match your reps from last week, more or less. And it's very easy, especially for beginners and intermediates, to be focused on just matching the reps and really lose touch with the target muscle. And because there's so many muscles that can take over and help, it ends up being that you're not getting a really good mind-muscle connection, which has been shown to be efficacious in the literature. And all of a sudden, you're doing lat pull-downs, yes. You're getting stronger, yes. But as far as stimulus to fatigue ratio for your lats, it's just not that great. So instead of having to come in and do, okay, 120 pounds of lat pull downs, I got to get 13 on my first set. And at some point when it gets challenging enough, you're like, fuck mind muscle connection. I just got to get these reps. Okay. Instead of doing that, maybe you want to do a giant set of 60 total reps in the lat pull downs. And you know that you're going to stop each set when, it's pretty close to failure, like 2 RIR, 3 or 1 or something like that. Like when it's a grind. But because you don't have to have a target for reps for any specific set, you just do every single rep by itself, mind-muscle connection, mind-muscle connection, mind-muscle connection, and then maybe you'll get like 13 reps on a first set, or maybe you'll get 10. And you can always slow down the pace a little bit and really reconnect with your lats so that every single rep of those 60 reps is very, very high stimulus to fatigue ratio, very, very high mind-muscle connection, and you can really hit your lats. And if after 6 of those sets you got to 54 reps, you can just do another 6 really good high-quality reps with lat pull-downs, finish your 60, and you're good to go. There's no pressure or no tracking pressure to make sure to execute a certain number of reps every single set. That can really release you to do a good job. And for a lot of listeners, I'm sure you guys train clients by yourself in person. For beginner clients, giant sets can be an excellent tool for learning, because what happens, honestly, when you tell your client who's been training for a month and a half, okay, we got to get 10 reps on the squat. Look, as soon as they hear that shit, they forget anything about technique. I've got to do whatever it takes to make 10 reps happen. But if you tell them, look, we're going to have to do a total of 60 squats today, or you don't even say anything, you're like, let's do some squats, and every rep is going to be great, and I'll let you know when to stop. Then, some sets, they get tired at 7 reps, and you say, okay, rack. Some sets, their technique is really good and the mind-muscle connection is really good up to 9 reps. Super. But how do you keep track of that? Of course, you don't want to randomly do it, right? You don't want to be like, well, we did 5 sets. Well, 5 sets of what? Right? You don't even know if you're overloading. The cool thing is if you add up all the reps they did, you say, okay, well, today we're at 51. Let's do 4 more. So, 4 more reps. We'll get to 55. And then next week we'll do the same shit. We'll count all the reps. And when we get closer, we say, okay, we're going to stop at 60 this time. And then we're going to stop at 70 and so on and so forth. So you can actually even increase weight on the bar while doing this if you want. But what it basically does is, because you're always going to hit a rough RIR target of, 4 to 0 RIR. So it's a good effective set. And because you don't worry about each set's reps, it's a really awesome tool to increase your technical abilities and to increase your stimulus to fatigue ratio. Because for even us folks that train a whole lot and a lot of people that don't train a whole lot, sometimes it's easy to lose track of the mind-muscle connection so much that, like, I don't know, Jan, have you ever had a set, like maybe when you're really fatigued, a set of some exercise where you put the set down after you finish, you're like, I don't know what the fuck I don't even know what I'm training anymore. Like, hypothetically, it's bicep curls, but fuck if I know. I used everything I could to do that. And your technique didn't break. It's just you just completely abandoned mind-muscle connection to get the reps done. Does that make sense?
Sometimes that happens, yes.
Yeah, 100%. And the thing is, for us people like yourself that are more advanced, it doesn't happen super often. So I don't use giant sets very often in my own training. But every now and again, if I'm not feeling an exercise, I'll use some giant sets for a mesocycle to really start feeling it again. And a lot of times this is great for experimenting with technique. For example, like if you want to do as many lat pull downs as you can, you got to pull, to wherever's strongest, or just sort of make it happen. You might not experiment rep to rep or set to set with different positions. Like you may be able to pull to the lower chest, pull to the higher chest, flare your elbows out, keep your elbows in. Giant sets let you keep track of how much total workload you're doing and how many hard sets you're doing, so to speak. They equate the reps to make sure that you're still doing as much work as you need to do, but you can actually experiment a lot set to set, rep to rep, to make sure that you're sort of finding your way. Because a lot of times You take an exercise for granted as not being super great. No, my muscle connection is not great. You're like, I'm just not built for it. Then you explore some different ways of doing it, but still get enough work done with giant sets. And all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I found a really awesome way to do this. And it's one of your best exercises, and use it for years and years.
Yeah, makes sense. And I may be false, but I do remember you kind of using giant sets in combination with BFR. Is that right? Or do I just...
Yeah, that's totally possible. So we'll talk about that later as far as occlusion
Gotcha.
training is concerned.
Gotcha. Yeah,
But you
yeah.
can totally, yeah, giant sets are great for occlusion training, because occlusion training, you just have to sort of strap in and crank them out. And giant sets are a
Mm.
good way of keeping track of that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's why I like kind of pack them in with the metabolic stress
Totally.
techniques. So yeah, finishing with the giant sets, I'm moving to Myo Reps. So I mean, yeah, you talked quite a lot in the last few podcasts I heard from you about Myo Reps, and maybe you will dive now into them and just
Sure.
explain real quick what a Myo Rep is and Myo Reps in general, and why they may not be why they may but me why they may be a good tool, but not the only tool for yeah, productive hypertrophy or maximal hypertrophy outcomes.
Yeah. So let me quickly go through what essentially constrains all of these types of training. And the constraint is rest times. Because a lot of these different types of training methods, they're really characterized by different rest times. So when we look at what constrains these things as far as rest times, we can take a look at a couple of factors. I think I listed 4 factors. I'm not even looking at them right now. Let's see if I can memorize them. I literally developed this like 2 days ago or something. So the first factor is probably all of your sets in hypertrophy, at least most of them, should be able to get at least 5 repetitions. So you have to be recovered enough. The rest time has to be long enough after the last set to get at least 5 reps. Because 0 to 5 RER is the biggest part of the effective rep spectrum. And it's kind of like if you're doing sets of 2, someone could ask you the question of, why not just like wait a little longer and do sets of 4? And they would be right on every single point. Like, there's really not an argument against that, because you're super high quality work and you get like almost double the high quality work. Like, that's a good thing. So any reps, any sets less than 5 reps really left something to be desired, something significant, and it's difficult to argue against that. Okay, so point number 1, you have to rest long enough for your next set to be at least 5 repetitions. And if it's not going to be 5 repetitions, you either reduce the load on it or you rest longer, or some combination of the two. Next point, your central fatigue should be low enough for you to be able to have a quality application of force to the target muscle, which means a couple of things if we dive in deeply into it. Number 1, you have to have recovered enough centrally to have the oomph to be ready to do another hard set. You know, so the central nervous system, a lot of times the way about which it communicates to us is through feelings. Right? You know, the feeling after squats, almost a failure, you feel deflated, like your ego feels deflated. If someone's like, Jan, you got another hard set, you're like, no. And you can even not be breathing heavy. You just feel like a wilted flower, you know, like you don't have that oomph in you anymore. Well, you need
My
that
soul
oomph.
is deflated.
Exactly. You need that oomph to push through, you know, those 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 RER reps that are where the faster motor units really get recruited and most of the tension occurs, or through them, and where much of the hypertrophy occurs. So if you don't feel like you have your mojo back, so to speak, just start another set, because yeah, you will go to failure, but your failure will be limited by your central drive, your ability to push. Did you ever like see someone going close to failure and then you start yelling at them and they go and hit like 3 or 4 more reps really fast? Well, they weren't really going to local muscular failure at all. So when they were going to failure, their faster twitch motor units were probably not even on, because how the hell are they going to get 3 or 4 more reps super fast like that unless they're saving those faster motor units from even being activated? So when we say we want 0 to 5 RIR, we mean local RIR. We mean those motor units themselves are getting fatigued from use, not other things like the central nervous system just not being able to push. Related to that, at least to some extent, is a mind-muscle connection. So what do you want when we say point number 2 is your central nervous system, central fatigue has to be low enough for you to get another productive rep? Well, one, you have to have some mojo. If you seriously ask yourself, hey, can I do another fucking hard 5 reps? The answer to in your own soul, there's nobody to lie to, has to be like, yes. You know that feeling you get when you're like, fuck, let's do it. Like it has to be that feeling. Oh, I'm sorry, alarm ringing. It has to be that feeling and it has to be legitimate. Point number 2 or subpoint in there of this point 2 is you have to have a reasonable expectation of a high mind-muscle connection. Like if you're like, okay, I feel like I can do curls, and then you look at your biceps and they're like noodles, and you're like, I'm not going to feel shit in my biceps. It's time to rest a little longer probably, because you want to be able to get back the idea that, okay, I can still focus on the muscle at hand. Does that make sense? So those 2 factors have to be in position. The next factor has to be what about your cardiovascular or cardiorespiratory limitation, right? So your cardiorespiratory limitation is if you're still breathing super fucking heavy, mostly from so much lactate being generated that your buffering system is breathing off a ton of carbon dioxide, you're going to be limited on your next set. Again, not by the local faster twitch motor units being fatigued, but the fact that your cardiorespiratory system can't deliver nutrients and remove waste fast enough, and you're just going to fail at that rung. And is that a good way to train your cardiorespiratory system? Yeah, totally. But it's sure as hell not the best way to train a local muscle. So if you're breathing like that, it's probably fine. But if you're like, it's not time to do another set. I mean, if you're training your lungs, totally. If you're training your muscles, it's just you're going to be limited by your breathing and absolutely not by the local musculature. Lastly, so that's 3 points. The fourth and last point, the synergistic muscles that are involved in producing that exercise so that the tension can be directed at the target muscle or muscles, they have to be recovered enough to not be the limiting factor. The easiest example is this. When you do a set of squats, let's say your lower back gets a really big pump and gets basically a burn in it, right? Your lower back gets a pump and a burn. If you start your quads could be very recovered and ready to go. No more burn in them. As soon as you're ready to go, you basically what that means is you might be doing a set of 10. Your quads could have done 12 or 15 reps, but your lower back starts to round so much at 10 that you collapse and you have to rack the bar. So then what happened? Well, you didn't wait for your synergist long enough to rest so that the target muscle, the quadriceps, could go to its own local close to failure point. Does that make sense? Because of its faster twitch motor units. So another really good example is, when doing bicep curls, do your forearms ever cramp up and get super pumped? So you're like, okay, I could do another set of curls, but it's just going to be a forearm exercise at that point, right? You got to wait long enough for your forearms to relax a little bit so your biceps can actually be the target. If we take all 4 of those together, we can apply them to different exercises and see which rest times fall out of that application. Right, so we have 2 intersecting circles. We have proper rest time algorithm of 4 rest time factors, and then we take another circle and we apply exercises down on top of them. We look below that, and all the stuff falls out of how is it the filter of rest times when we apply it to exercises and body parts. What does it lead to? Well, one of the first things it leads to is something that James Krieger has talked about before. Short rest times do not work well for hypertrophy for exercises that are really centrally fatiguing, which means 2 things. One, they centrally fatigue your nervous system, like squats or deadlifts, where you feel defeated for minutes after instead of seconds. And 2, your cardiorespiratory system is heavily taxed. So if you do 30 seconds of rest for those, or 10 seconds of rest, it's all it's going to train is your cardiorespiratory system and your central nervous system, and it's never even going to get to hardly training or optimally training your local musculature, which is why Myo Reps, which are basically very short rest interval sets, are inappropriate wholly for big compound exercise. Can you imagine Jan doing Myo Reps for barbell bent rows? What the fuck would that even look like? Right? Like, you would bend over twice, and after the 3rd time, you would just collapse, and it'd be like, come on, get more reps. And you're like, look, I'm not feeling shit in my back anymore. I'm feeling it in my lungs. I'm feeling it in my soul. I'm feeling it in my lower back and my glutes. And there's nothing about this that's lats anymore, right? And funny enough, something like squats, you would quickly drop below 5 reps, right? Like, you would be doing 10 and then 1 and then 0, and then that would be that, right? With me so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would yeah, maybe even add like a fifth one to the rest period thing. And I mean, maybe you touched on that, but just like mental fatigue, like
Yeah, that's in
you
central
have.
nervous system.
Okay,
Yes,
gotcha.
totally. Great
Because
point. Yeah,
yeah, because just couldn't do like myo reps on like a big compound movement,
sure.
just like mentally, especially when you, for example, dieting for contest prep, you
Sure.
just don't want to do like myo reps on a squat, on a back squat, or even a hack squat
Totally.
or something like that.
Yeah, 100%. So basically, myo reps can be seen as relatively straight sets applied to muscle groups and exercises where we can check the main boxes of the four fatiguing factors relatively quickly. And then what ends up happening is, uh, especially because some of these exercises are so small, that your cardiorespiratory system isn't really ever going to be constraining them. We're really only checking three factors, which means we're checking the factor of the local muscle is good enough. It doesn't have as much lactate in it as it did before. It's able to do at least 5 reps. The central nervous system is recovered for you to feel like, okay, I can fucking do this again. And the synergist muscles are no longer taxing. That can occur as quickly as 5 or 10 seconds after you've done a set in some exercises, especially ones in which cardiorespiratory system is just not really involved because they're very small muscle mass exercises. So, for example, myo reps are excellent for cable triceps pushdowns, right? Where they're really just sort of straight sets. But because we don't have to worry about cardiorespiratory stuff, they can be done roughly every 5 to 15 seconds. And what ends up happening is you start myo reps usually in the 10 to 20 rep range somewhere. You do a first set, and then as soon as you're recovered on all counts, you hit another set. And because we say, okay, you have to recover to get at least 5 reps, usually the next set will be something like 5 to 8 reps. And then you recover until you hit all those check marks again, and then another set of 5 to 8 reps, and so on and so forth. And you can do as many of those as you have programmed or allotted or whatever. When you have to stop doing myo reps. You can stop them way earlier. Is when you start getting with your normal rest times that you've been doing less than 5 reps per set. But of course, that doesn't have to happen because you can always just rest longer, right? So what most people will do is they'll set their myo reps rest at a pre-programmed time that for sure gets them into that 5 to 10 range on the second set. And then they'll just repeat that rest time until the reps drop below 5, and then they cut it off. That's a totally cool way to do it. Or you just have as many myo rep sets as it takes pre-programmed. You're saying I start my mesocycle with 2 myo rep sets, which means I do a set of 15, and then I do a set of 8, and then I stop. And then the next week I'll add another one, and I'll add another one, and I'll add another one, and we'll just keep adding them. And you can take as long of rest time as you need in order to make sure they're all above 5 reps. So those are myo reps, and they're basically straight sets with that number 3 condition of cardiorespiratory performance really just kind of taken out, because your biceps just don't cause a whole lot of cardiorespiratory disruption because there's only so much lactate your biceps can produce. Now, you can use myo reps with bigger body parts. You're not going to be getting as many sets with those, but they can still be an effective strategy. That is, your lungs eventually catch up to you and they don't buy you as much time anymore. So one of them is leg press. You can do myo reps on the leg press. That's a hell of a feat, but it can be done. What you do is you do a set of 10 to 20 leg presses. You may not even move your feet from the platform. You rack and you lock out your legs, and then you rest as many seconds as it takes, again, to, okay, I can do for sure another 5 reps, great. My central nervous system is recovered enough for me to really be able to push in these 5 reps. And then my synergist muscles, well, in the leg press, there really are no synergist muscles pretty much when you think about it. Or, my lower back feels fine, my calves feel fine. And my cardiorespiratory system is recovered enough so that I do to close to failure. And then you could do that on leg press. The thing is, like, you may be able to do myo reps, like, you may be able to crank out 6 myo rep sets of bicep curls on the cable curl machine, and no problem. 6 myo rep sets on the leg press, I would like to see somebody try. You may die doing that shit, but more than likely, your lungs will become so there'd be a huge lung burn, and or your mind-muscle connection, your ability to generate peak tension will drop off so much that you're really just going through the motions at that point, and you won't be able to do 5 reps with an appropriate load. So that's myo reps, and they're kind of a consequence of basically you're cardiovascularly not as limited, or you do as many of them as you can fit in until your cardiovascular system becomes limited, which by definition means myo reps are usually done with secured compound exercises like chest supported rows, leg presses, something in which you don't have to maintain your own erection. There you go, there's a wordplay there. You don't have to stay upright under load. And usually, the more that these things are isolation and the smaller the muscle groups, the more myo rep style training becomes. Now, I will say this: so myo reps have a cool advantage. A lot of the times when you do a working set, some of the first couple of reps are not very hypertrophic. Now, they're pretty hypertrophic to slower twitch muscle fibers, but those muscle fibers usually get trained from just you moving around anyway. Some of those lead-in reps there's a good function for them. They're hypertrophic to the sort of intermediate twitch fibers, which you still need. So you don't always want to make everything myo rep training. But myo reps have a cool ability to make the fraction of your reps in the total number of sets that you do that are very stimulating as quite high. That's the advantage. The disadvantage is you're walking a very thin tightrope of I'm doing less than 6 reps per set, or I'm doing less than 8 reps per set, which means most of my reps are hypertrophic, but I have to be honest about how much central fatigue and local fatigue I'm experiencing with other muscles, because I don't want to lie to myself and say, well, I'm doing 8 hard reps, but really they're not as hard as they could have been because you're getting incrementally more tired. So you have to be very honest with yourself, especially about that central fatigue of, am I really pushing the muscle? Because myo reps are easy to just coast through. Just do 5, it hurts, I'm tired, that's it. Another 5, okay. Well, you're really just doing a bunch of really, really submaximal sets. You're just accumulating a whole bunch of fatigue sort of for no big reason. So basically, like, it's one of those things where myo reps, to ask yourself the question of, is an exercise fitted for myo reps, is really to ask yourself the question of, can I rest so little and still check all the boxes and still get in good hard sets? And then if the answer to that is yes, then that's really good, and that means that you're good to go. So if the answer to that is no, then the myo reps are inappropriate, or you need to rest more time to allow for myo reps to be effective. I will say that some exercises seem to be all myo rep training if you want it to be, because they are so non-systemically and non-centrally fatiguing that really the only and they don't have any synergists, that the only question you have to ask is the muscle locally able to do at least 5 repetitions? And then the answer to is it a good idea to do another set is usually yes. For example, wrist curls for forearms. What the hell? You're not going to get overall high, heavy breathing from them. They're centrally not very difficult. When you reach failure, you're like, that's failure. Like, it's not a big deal. For those exercises, for those muscles, I literally rest 5 to 10 seconds between each one of those, right? For calf raises, my first set of calf raises is 20 reps. My second set is 8 reps. And then it's 7, 6, 5, 5, 5, and I'm done. So, and if it's 4, I rest a little longer, and then I can get 6 again, right? And people say oh my God, why do you rest only 20 or 30 seconds between calf raises? Why the fuck would I rest any longer? I'm hitting all the effective reps that I need. Yes, there is an argument for doing more volume to hit more of the slower twitch motor units, which probably require more volume to grow anyway. So there is a good thing to do straight sets and more of them, especially for some muscles. But for a lot of muscles, for example, forearms get a lot of intermediate and slower twitch fiber work from just gripping everything else. Your calves get a lot of it from walking up and down stairs and moving your ass around. So for them, when you train forearms and calves, you're really only after probably the more fast twitch motor units anyway that don't get trained very often. Why you would rest any longer than 10 or 15 seconds, or any longer than the burn leaves the local muscle and you're ready to do another set of hard 5 reps again, why you rest any longer than that is really honestly beyond me. You can rest longer, but then you're sort of making an argument for yourself that you're engineering more junk volume into your plan, junky volume. And in addition to that, you're just taking up more time. People will say how long does it take you to train forearms or calves every week? Probably a sum total of 3 minutes, but that's for 25 sets. It just doesn't take that long, right? So that's the deal, and that's how myo reps are basically in that same spectrum. Now, really quick, because the explanation for drop sets is super simple once you've done myo reps. So before we transition to talking about supersets, let me really quick talk about. Go ahead.
Can I just really quick?
Sure.
The thing with myo reps is, as you said, I usually tend to program them a lot with calves. Pretty much, I think I only do like calf myo reps pretty much
Yep.
for like my clients and myself, because it just saves them so much time, and just overall like training calves, especially at the end of like a big lower session or something like a big squat session, big deadlift session, is just annoying. And I tend
Sure.
to see like a huge increments in adherence as well to calf training by just implementing my reps.
Yeah.
And
To
as
be
you
honest, Yana, sorry, real quick, if you think about it, you do myo reps for all of your training. The difference is because my reps, if we don't consider them a special thing anymore, it's just my reps are when you can check all four boxes quickly, right?
ba-
You,
basically short rest.
oh, sure, but well, an appropriate amount of rest to get at
Yeah,
least 5
yeah,
effective reps, which is what you do for everything else. That's what you do for squats, except it takes 3 minutes to check the cardiorespiratory box. Seriously, when you think about it, that's really
yeah.
what it is, right?
Kind of. I mean,
So,
you talked about effective reps on the last Revive Stronger podcast, and I think some people just assume that like myo reps will get you only effective reps, and to some point that's probably true regarding which exercise you choose and to do myo reps on, but I guess that it could be just like a too dogmatic use of myo reps, where you basically kind of do it on pretty much every exercise.
sure.
And as I
But then
said,
what you're doing
it's
is going through the
probably,
motions. Yeah.
yeah, I think as you said, it's probably more nuanced, and it's a good technique when appropriately used, and not like only like training only with my reps.
Sure. Well, I mean, if you apply the rubric of the four rest time qualifiers,
Yeah,
it turns out that my reps meet all of those just fine, and where they're inappropriate is where they don't meet them. Right? Like people
yeah,
try to train for my reps, but their lungs are limiting. Well, that's not really my reps anymore. That's just needlessly short rest, and that gets you into some trouble. Another thing is this. Um, so the argument let's do a real interesting discussion really quick. Let's talk about the difference between doing a set when you're ready to do only 5 reps versus a set when you're ready to do as many as 8 reps. So we're talking about a difference of 3 reps. Some people could say that those 3 reps are junk volume, right? And they would say that those 3 reps are better off just we rest less and we just stop doing them and we just do sets of 5, right? But there is a little nuance in there because especially in technically demanding exercises with a lot of mind-muscle connection requirement, there may be a benefit in doing slightly more than 5 reps to get into the groove and build some momentum and figure out your technique and your mind-muscle connection so that by the time you get into the 0 to 5 RR rep range, you're doing everything you can to squeeze the most out of those reps. Because just starting a set and the first rep is already hard may not be the greatest thing in the world. Now, for sets over 8 reps long, does that argument start to degrade a little bit? Totally. It absolutely does. Is there another argument for doing those reps, in 12 reps, 6 not effective reps or another 10 not effective reps? Yeah, because those reps are still effective for slower twitch fibers, which still need to grow. So, for example, for your pectoralis muscles, you don't hardly use them barely at all day to day. So even their slower twitch fibers are not very hypertrophied. You can get really robust growth in your pecs stopping at 6 RIR. Not for long, not if you're super advanced, but as a beginner, absolutely. And when you're advanced, probably going through at least to sets of 15 will get you robust growth in the pecs, even if you don't go super close to failure. So those reps that are shy of the most effective reps, especially for non-postural muscles, can still be relatively effective. And here's the bonus. If you only train for effective reps and only do myo reps, the volume to those slower twitch, intermediate twitch muscle fibers is really low because your total volume of workout is very low because it's only effective reps. You do 10 sets and it's only 50 reps. Usually slow twitch muscles are very volume tolerant and volume resistant, and they probably need more work physically, more reps to hypertrophy to their maximum.
Yeah.
And another one is If you don't hypertrophy them at all, you're missing out on hypertrophy. Brad Schoenfeld did a couple lit reviews back in the day where he showed that, contrary to popular belief, slower twitch fibers do hypertrophy, and significantly, and they do account for a big fraction of your muscle size. It's not all the fast twitch fibers. Its slower twitch fibers are very, very important. Now, the thing is, they usually get a good deal of training just by training with everything else, but sometimes you need to do higher rep sets that are not super close to failure, or at least the first part of them isn't, to get those slower twitch, intermediate twitch fibers check marked. And here's another benefit to training like that, doing full-length sets, full-length straight sets. The stimulus to fatigue ratio per fiber is fucking amazing when you're not driving close to failure. I mean, if I told you you're missing on 10% or 20% of your muscle growth, which is not that big in the grand scheme, but, you know, is significant, because you only do Myo Reps, or you only take 5 reps per set after the first set or whatever, and I said you were missing 10 to 20% of your growth, and then you would say, well, how hard is it for me to get that growth? Well, like, just do more sub-maximal reps. Oh my God, those are the fucking easiest reps in the world to do. Like, pick up a bar that's 40 pounds, curl it 10 times, or you could have done 18, put it down. You just stimulated some muscle growth. But it's not a lot. But in the context of the total training program, it's probably worth it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So overall, it's kind of junky volume if you want to grow all your motor units with it. But if you just want to grow those, it's totally good to go. So I would advise people that, yes, there is definitely benefit in resting just little enough to get another 5 reps, and that's totally cool. You can do all of your sets like that. But I would say there should probably be a spectrum where you some sets, for the straight sets especially, you rest long enough to get 10 reps total, 15 reps total on your second, third, fourth sets, etc. Right? Whereas in some situations you can totally go for the Myo Rep style. So for more postural muscles, the ones that operate all the time, forearms and stuff, calves, I think you could basically do like almost exclusively Myo Reps and get very close to optimal training. But for muscles like your chest, your back, probably your shoulders to some extent, depending on which head we're talking about. Some normal repetition training with plenty of submaximal reps and effective reps is probably the best balance. Now, you don't want to do, you want every set pretty much to have some effective reps in it. You don't want to do sets of, with your 15 RM for 8 reps all the time, but you want to do some sets of 15 reps where the last 5 are very hypertrophic to your faster switch motor units, and the first 10 are still hypertrophic to your intermediate twitch units, but maybe not, the most hypertrophic to the fast twitch.
Fantastic.
Cool.
That was a
all
great
right.
explanation.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So,
Moving on to drop sets.
Drop sets. Drop sets is easy. We don't have to talk much about it, because here's the thing. Instead of waiting just a little longer to make sure you recovered enough to do another 5 reps with the same load for Myo Reps, you simply drop the load to meet that rest time shorter. That's it. So you ask yourself the question of, can I do another 5 reps at 100 kilos? Nope. Can I do another 5 reps right now at 90 kilos? Yes, 90, and then go and you do 5 reps and that's it. So you just keep dropping down the weight to basically cut the rest time even shorter, but still hit all of those conditions, because you're not asking yourself, question number 1 is, has the target muscle locally recovered to do at least 5 reps in the next set? You're asking yourself that question about, well, at what load? You can change the load, then you can contract the rest times. Is there a benefit to that? Well, if lactate and other metabolites turn out to be directly hypertrophic, there's a sweet benefit of that. Is the fucking gnarliest way to wash your muscles and metabolites. So that could be a small benefit. The downside is that you're using incrementally lighter weights, which honestly enough, you can get into a situation where the weights are so light, your mind-muscle connection is actually worse, because you don't perceive a real big tension throughput where you're supposed to. You're kind of just doing this. And sometimes that can be a loss of mind-muscle connection. So what I would say is drop sets are a type of Myo Reps where you reduce the load. They should be used very judiciously, usually for the express purpose of generating metabolites. If your job is just to try to train with as many effective reps as possible, I would recommend Myo Reps over drop sets. But if you want to distinctly go after metabolite generation, then drop sets are a pretty good idea, because they offer many of the advantages of Myo Reps: shorter rest times, more metabolites, but less tension stimulus. so in a potentially less mind-muscle connection, which is really to say the same thing. So drop sets, if we have a universe of exercises which we can do all, straight sets with, because you could do straight sets with everything, the percent of those exercises with which you could do Myo Reps is smaller, and the percent of those exercises in the Myo Reps with which you can do drop sets is smaller still, just a little bit, because some exercises where it's easy to lose a mind-muscle connection, they're probably not ideally built for drop sets. So there's some you can do Myo Reps with, but a smaller universe for drop sets. So drop sets are cool for exercises, and especially there needs to be, here's another consideration, and this is just real-world stuff. You need to be able to drop the weight fast. For the leg press, if you put 200 kilos in the leg press, you can do Myo Reps no problem by yourself. How the fuck are you going to do drop sets? You get out of the leg press, take weight off, get back in. Well, here's the problem. That generated cardiorespiratory fatigue and generated fatigue in supporting muscles. Now you're violating your checklist. You're going to have to wait longer. So why don't you just sit in the fucking machine? Myo Reps for dumbbells are easy. You could just take out the 15-kilo dumbbells and go to town. You don't need to bother everybody by going 15, 12 and a half, 10, 7 and a half. If you have access to that and there's not a ton of people in the gym, I think it's totally good to go. Though you do have to ask yourself if you could just save yourself a huge hassle and central fatigue and cardiorespiratory fatigue by not having to exchange the weights. So I'd say the drop sets are ideal with a cable selectorized stack, right? Cable pushdowns, cable curls, cable upright rows, things like that. Anything that's not a cable or a stack mechanism, you have to wonder if Myo Reps are probably a better choice in that regard.
Out of curiosity, I probably may know the answer, but just for the listeners, is there any cap off in like higher rep ranges in terms of drop sets? So programming wise, how high do you tend to go with the drop sets in the first set, in the initial set, and then also for the drops? And how much do you usually tend to program the drop in percent of like a 1 or 10 IM?
Yeah, you have to be careful about programming percentages because level of fatigue could be unpredictable. It doesn't matter what you have on paper. If you can't do more than 5 reps, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. As far as where do you start with the load? Generally speaking, because it starts a good metabolite kick and because it's a light enough weight for where drops makes sense, anywhere in the 10 to 20 range is a good first set for drop sets and Myo Reps. And then from there, the reps fall where they may, and you drop the load by enough so that you can for sure get 5 reps on the next one. And that's different for different exercises. A lot of times it's just the next movement in the stack. And it also really depends on how long you're resting. So you think about this, like if you rest 5 seconds between sets and drop sets, you can drop by 1 clip. All right. If you rest 2 seconds, you might need to drop by 2 clips, right? If you rest 1 second, you may need to drop by 3 clips. So it's really, I wouldn't say it's arbitrary, but it's really a bit of a moot point. You just have to make sure you rest long enough to get at least 5 reps and you're pushing close to failure in each set, and then it sort of takes care of itself. Here's an example. Sometimes what would happen is you continue the progression down. Let's say you started at 60 kilos and you worked your way down to 30 kilos. And on 30 kilos, you, instead of doing a grinder 5, you did 9. And then on 20 kilos, you did 12. Well, you're going in the wrong direction then. You're no longer conserving effective reps. What you should be doing is going back up to 30, and maybe you're now doing Myo Reps. Does that make sense? So basically, you might do from 60, 50, 40, you do drop, drop, drop. And then 30, 30, 30, you do Myo Rep, Myo Rep, Myo Rep. Because if you went to 20, it would just be way too light, and you would recover even with 1 second rest. You could do it again. Does that make sense? So sometimes you can use a combination of drop sets and Myo Reps in the same element. What you just have to do is check the 2 boxes or check the 4 boxes. And if the 4 boxes are checked, then you're good to go. However you get to checking those boxes is your call. You can check them by resting a long time and having sets of 10 to 12. You can check them by resting a short time, just enough. Then you go 10, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 4, and then you're done. Or you can check them by going 10, 5, and then drop the weight 5, drop the weight 5, drop the weight 5, 4, and then you're done, or something like that. So how you go about checking the boxes doesn't matter as much. You just have to make sure to check all the boxes.
Yeah, I tend to go with minus 10 to 20% of load, and then just tell my clients usually that they should just reduce the load, and that's basically the rest time, and they tend to then get another 5 to 10 reps.
Perfect. 5 to 10 is that golden zone, I think, where it's enough reps to really get a good mind-muscle connection, but not so many that your effective rep number drops. And also, you don't accumulate a whole lot of metabolites if you're doing a lot of really submaximal repetitions. Like the first 2 reps of a set of 10, you really aren't even accumulating lactate. And then so you're sort of wasting reps. You're wasting fatigue on reps that aren't really going towards your definitely not going to effective reps, and they're not going to metabolite generation either. So I think 5 to 10 reps is a really good golden zone. If you start to drop below 5, we have a problem of not enough effective reps and probably not enough metabolite summation anyway. And if we go above 10, we're really just using a load that's inappropriate to generate both metabolites super effectively or effective reps. So
do you think there's a problem with going below 30% of 1RM in like the last drop sets?
It's a really good question. Probably. I would say my first guess is probably. We haven't researched that bottom end of the range enough, especially with things like drop sets, to figure out if we can't even get a really effective situation getting out of 20% of 1RM just by locally fatiguing the muscle enough. But I will say there's probably a limit to that. Those reps that are so light that you're not even getting a mind-muscle connection anymore.
Yeah.
Gee, that's probably somewhere in that 30%, 20% 1RM. So I think I'm comfortable in the real world. I mean, when I do interviews or write books, I'm saying 30% is the cutoff. When I real world give advice, I say, you can go to as low as 20. I think you're fine as long as you're grinding the shit out of that and really getting a ton of effective reps and honestly getting local failure. But a lot of times when you drop below that 20% or 30%, it's not local failure anymore. It's central failure. It's cardiorespiratory failure, so on and so forth. And the central failure is really, and that's a slight problem with especially drop sets. The pain of metabolite accumulation can result in a lack of engagement of the fastest twitch motor units to do those extracellular reps. So sometimes the pain is what prevents you from exposing your central nervous system to really using it as much as you could. And that's a problem. So if someone's like someone just did a set of bicep curls and you want them to go right away, and they're like, the right answer isn't shut up, you're a pussy, do more. The right answer might be like, okay, let's rest 15 seconds until the pain is gone and then put another high quality set. Does that make sense? Like, I think that probably makes a bit more sense than just, infinitely getting more and more painful. Then you're limited by pain. Is that good to train to be able to take pain? Sure, but it has not much to do with hypertrophy, I don't think.
And regarding relative intensities, I remember that I asked you that question probably, how long is it ago? 1.5 years or something in Vienna on the seminar. How do you program relative intensities, and at what range usually in metabolite techniques?
Yeah. So, I mean, you get really good metabolites at anywhere between, 4 and 0 RIR with exercises that are more isolation based. If you really want to push metabolites, getting closer to 2 RIR or less is probably a good idea. But it also depends on how long you want to keep doing these sorts of things. If you're doing them for a whole mesocycle and you're not used to them, stopping them at even 4 RIR for a couple of sets can get you a pretty good pump and a pretty good burn. And then you start go from there, and then you add sets, potentially increase the load, and also contract the RIR to where it's 3 RIR, 2, 1, 0, so on and so forth. People will say well, you just got to train with 0 RIR the whole time. You could do that. That's a lot of fatigue. I'll tell you what it is. It is a lot of psychological fatigue. And that stuff affects you over the weeks, not just days. Like coming in and getting on the cable curl and knowing you have to push to absolute fucking failure is real, real hard. And it might not be worth the fatigue, because that fatigue spills over into the rest of your workout. That's one of the reasons people say don't do drop sets at the beginning of your workout, because they will fuck you up. Centrally, the pain-derived fatigue and the effort-derived fatigue can just make you not able to try hard on anything else. So, when we say, well, if the point of drop sets is to get, as many effective reps as possible, why don't you just go all the way to failure? Because there's downsides to that. Because failure is really fucking fatiguing. So I think there's a really good argument to be made that maybe you should start drop sets and Myo Reps at 2 or 3 RIR instead of 4 or 5. But I think the argument of starting them at 0 RIR might not be that super great, especially if you try it. On paper it can look nice, and you try it, you're like, fuck this, I'm not doing this for 4 fucking weeks. And instead of doing that for 4 weeks, maybe you could have done more working sets because, you could have better fatigue, better recovery ability. So I think that when it comes down to it, yeah, it's still roughly the same as straight sets, maybe a little less reps in reserve, but nothing too crazy. Because if you start at 0 RIR, gee, there's just not anywhere to go from there, and you're very quickly going to be overwhelmed by a ton of pain and probably a lot of psychological fatigue.
Yeah, I usually tend to go from 2 to 0
Yep.
over mesocycle, and I tend to like observe that people, I think in the higher rep ranges, people are not really that good in gauging failure. I think
Sure.
because it's so much pain, and to really push like a 30 rep set to 0 reps in reserve is probably not a lot of people can actually do that. And I think there's also a rationale for um, not doing any kind of breaks in like higher rep sets, in terms of like, just for example, a lateral raise set with 30 reps. You
Mm-hmm.
really want to do the 30 reps continuously, and because at some point when you stop for real quick because you're in such a pain, like just stopping at the bottom and just for a second or something and breathe, you kind of buying again like 3 to 5 reps or something like that.
Sure.
And so I think there's an argument to really have like a continuous tempo, I guess.
Sure.
And
Sure.
yeah.
Another thing to point out is people, it's lately become fashionable to rag on straight sets. But straight sets of up to 15 reps, if not even lighter, you can be so well recovered for them, like 2 or 3 minutes rest between sets, that nothing is stopping you at the end of that set. The only thing that's stopping you is local motor unit fatigue, which is exactly what you want. When you do Myo Reps, especially when you do drop sets, the later drop sets, you're stopping because there's all kinds of fatigue going on. And some of it might be fatigue at the neuromuscular junction, like your nervous system is trying to tell your muscles to contract, but they've displaced so many metabolites that the nerve has trouble talking to the muscle itself. So is it the motor units themselves are fatigued? No, right? And also, if you get a lot of motor unit fatigue that accelerates sort of slowly over the sets, even if it's local fatigue, at some point the motor units just don't turn on for very long because they get tired and they just sort of die off. That's it. So straight sets have the benefit of, if you rest multiple minutes between sets and you're doing sets of 5 to 15 reps, those last several reps are really just only locally limited. Like, think about doing a set of 8 on Smith machine feet forward squats. Every single time you push from reps 4 to reps 8, it's your quads that limit you. It's not pain. Like, there's actually no pain training like that. Like, your joints don't feel like great. There's no local acid-induced pain. When you fail at 8 reps, you fail because you do this like it just doesn't move anymore.
Yeah.
And you can tell, like, everything else, you feel great psychologically. Your fucking muscles just don't work. And they're not working because they've accumulated so much fatigue. It's just that's as many reps as you're getting recruiting all of your motor units. That's the kind of close to failure training that definitely grows the most fast twitch motor unit muscle, for sure. So when people try to make everything Myo Reps and drop sets, I think it actually turns out to be a really good thing for intermediate twitch motor units, for the bigger ones. But the biggest, I think, still benefit mostly from straight sets with plenty of breaks, taking 4 minutes between stiff-legged deadlifts, 3 minutes between squats, 5 minutes between super heavy bent rows. That's how you get a lot of real fast fiber hypertrophy. You just make sure the load is heavy enough that you're doing between 5 and 15 reps per set, tons of effective reps, tons of other reps that are still heavy enough to be really hypertrophic for intermediate fibers. All of a sudden, you have really, really good training. So we have to make sure to realize that even though Myo Reps and drop sets seem like there's this golden arc of only effective reps, yes, they pretty much train after the first set only effective reps, but the total effect of each rep probably is a bit lower than it otherwise would be because you're tired for a bunch of different reasons, not just tension limited by the fiber itself. You're tension limited by the lactate around the fiber, the nerve itself, so on and so forth. So even if you check all the major boxes, you can't check them fully with Myo Reps and drop sets, so you have to be careful not to use them exclusively. There's still a place for straight sets. Funny enough, I tend to notice that muscles are more fast twitch dominant, and individuals that are more fast twitch dominant benefit more from straight sets and less from Myo Reps, drop sets, and other kinds of metabolite training, probably because they have such a poor ability to remove metabolites from their local musculature, and because they're so strong and those motor units are so big that they fatigue so quickly that if you try to squeeze them for tons and tons of effective reps all the time, they just get super fucking tired and then dick happens to them. They're just kind of sitting around. And a lot of people who are really fast twitch will tell you, like, yeah, I do sets of 15 for high reps and drop sets. I just don't really feel a whole lot. I feel like really shitty mind-muscle connection, which to me tells me they're not even activating their faster twitch motor units because they get so tired. They might be active for a rep or two, and they're like, fuck that, right? But if you do straight sets for those people, like basically sets of 8, like, man, there's not a lot of fast twitch muscles you can't grow with straight sets of 8 because they offer all the advantages of having lots of effective reps, and even their less effective reps are still super effective because the weight is that objectively heavy. Your mind-muscle connection is great. You're not limited by your lungs at all. You're not limited by pain at all. The only thing you have to deal with is you have to rest longer, which is a pain in the ass, but it's what you accepted. And there's a higher injury risk because the absolute load is so high, right? But I think sometimes people look for these ways of training where, like, ooh, if we just pre-fatigue everything and it's just the local faster twitch fibers, we can use 30% 1RM and get the exact same hypertrophy long-term with almost no injury risk as we would with training sets of 6 or 8. I don't think that's true, especially for large faster twitch fibers. I think every now and again there's some growth to be got from straight sets of 5 to 10, 10 to 15 reps that you just can't get from anything else.
Great. Great detailed explanation and insights. I just love it. So let's move on to supersets. Otherwise, I think we have to break up the metabolite techniques into part 3. So
supersets are relatively easy because we've already set up so much of the conversation theoretically that it's actually very easy to describe. Supersets, the way I do them, these are not antagonistic supersets to save time. That's a whole different discussion. That's not for bodybuilding. It's for general fitness, and it works great. I think almost all clients that are trying to step on stage or trying to get maximum hypertrophy should just be doing compound alternating supersets, like benches with rows, pull-ups with incline press. That's super great. Supersets here refer – go ahead.
Actually, I have noted down exactly that question, your rationales behind why you think that antagonist supersets may be a good method to save time but are suboptimal for maximal hypertrophic outcome. So maybe you can just quickly describe supersets and then maybe just quickly dive into that question.
I tell you exactly. I answered that question as those 4 rest time factors that I talked about earlier. You tell me you're going to do a set of incline dumbbell presses and you're going to be cardiorespiratorily recovered to do a set of bent rows right after? Get the fuck up out of here. That's nonsense. Like, if you're smaller and weaker, probably, because for you to do incline presses basically doesn't tire you out at all. Do you ever train like really tiny female lifters? They do a set of barbell incline presses to failure and they rack and they're like, okay, what's next? You're like, well, apparently you're just not fatigued at all. So it's time to do barbell bent rows, after which you also won't be fatigued. So for people that are much smaller, people that are recreationally trained, people that don't care about optimal hypertrophy, I think compound alternating supersets are amazing time savers. The problem is if you take bigger athletes that exude a lot of central fatigue, both central fatigue in the technical sense of neuromuscular fatigue and brain fatigue. Like, after a set of bent rows, you lose some fucking oomph. You're not just going to do a set of bent rows and then lie down and do an awesome set on the bench press. You're not. Your mind-muscle connection is not going to be there. Your willpower is not going to be there. Your pain tolerance is not going to be there. So fuck that. And cardiorespiratory-wise, you're not going to be there because you're still fucking after bent rows, you're gasping for air. I mean, think about alternating squats with presses. That's nonsense, right? You're just not going to get anywhere on presses. And then the local muscle might be ready to do 5 reps. That's a check because it hasn't been doing anything, but that's the only check mark. And then what about synergist muscles? Like, you just use your shoulders to stabilize bent rows. Now you have to use them again to do bench press. Your shoulders might tire out before your pecs do on the bench press if you go back and forth like that. So I will say that people who recommend compound alternating supersets as the way to train for bodybuilding, almost never bodybuilders. And if they are, they're not very big and not very strong. As you get bigger and stronger, you realize that is not a tenable method to train that allows you to locally allow the limiting factor to be those fibers that you want to hit. Your limiting factor is going to be cardiorespiratory, neuromuscular, or synergistic, and it's not going to be local if you go too far with compound alternating supersets.
And to take the question even further into a much more interesting part, I think, is why wouldn't you necessarily program muscle groups in an alternating setting? So a pull, a push, not a superset, but like in an upper body split, for example, an upper session, like a pull and a push and a pull and a push. But I know that you prefer the pull push setting.
Sure.
Over the
I'll give you a couple of reasons. One, I think metabolite sequestration occurs better when you sequester metabolites over and over in the same place versus sequestering them here and then running them to somewhere else. And then so basically you get like a flow through effect of blood, and then you don't get the sequestration as much. A more strong critique is as you do more sets in a workout in a single session, your central fatigue just goes up. It just does, right? Until you're doing only junk volume and you have to leave. If you are trying to make as many effective reps as possible locally to a muscle, you have to make sure that you're doing, like, you chest, you've pre-exhausted your chest. Now it's actually easier to locally stimulate it. You might as well keep going because your stimulus to fatigue ratio for your chest is actually really good now. If you do a bunch of flies, now if you do bench right away, you have to do less benching, and central fatigue is less a limiting factor to still hit those muscle fibers in the chest. But if you do flies and then you do pull-ups, now when you go to bench, your central fatigue is higher than it was, okay? But your local fatigue has had a chance to wash out and recover. So now you need to push more weight for more reps to get the same local stimulus when you're more centrally fatigued. It's backwards. It makes no goddamn sense. So once you start on a muscle group in a workout, it's probably good to start it, work on it, finish it, and go on to the other. Because remember, someone could say, oh, but then you really fuck over, like if you're doing chest and back, you really fuck over your back because you do it last. You got to fuck something over. It might as well be a good workout for something and a not so great workout for something else. And then next time you do back first, then chest second, right? So I think that's my sort of response to that whole critique.
And what do you think about the argument that programming them antagonistic will lead to better performance per exercise?
Sure.
Fatigue will dissipate to accumulating
totally.
more volume versus training multiple
performance is interesting. Very good question. Very good question. Performance is interesting because, another way to say that is you get more ineffective reps that way. Okay. If you do make a recovery locally, then you get more reps, but that's nice. But those are fewer of them are effective reps. You're actually reducing your stimulus to fatigue ratio. If we want to get as much work as we can per unit time, it's a great way to train. But that's not the purpose of hypertrophy training. The purpose is maximum stimulus. Another thing is almost all of the studies that are conducted to show an increase in performance are on beginners who have a very large co-contraction effect, right? A lot of times when people bench press, they'll pull and push at the same time because they don't know what the fuck they're doing. And if you pre-exhaust their lats, they can't pull as hard, so their pushing actually gets better. The thing is, more advanced athletes don't co-contract nearly as much because they're good at the techniques. More advanced athletes do not get a huge improvement in performance from doing antagonistic training. And sometimes because of mind muscle connection effects, they may get a worse improvement in performance or a worse performance. If you want me to do bench and then incline dumbbells, as soon as I'm done benching, I'm going to be really in touch with my pecs. They're going to be pumped. I'm going to give you a pretty good incline dumbbell performance. But if you have me do barbell rows or pull downs between those two, I'll have to take a couple of reps or sets to reacquaint myself with my pecs again and all the proper movements they're in when I come back to incline dumbbells later, and so on and so forth. Mind muscle connection is a real thing, and once you've got it going, you don't want to stop. Like you hit bent rows, then you hit pull downs, then you hit pullovers, and your rats are fried, and you can move on to something else. Again, it's questionable why we want a performance improvement, because you're essentially saying, so we have more central fatigue, but we have an improvement in performance because the local fatigue has reduced. Well, that's kind of backwards. We want the most local fatigue and the least central fatigue. Compound alternating supersets are flipping that on their back.
It makes absolute sense, and I think also in regards to the research in the last, I think maybe 2 to 3 years, it became more clear that actually probably the best measurement for hypertrophy or like for volume in general is hard sets versus total work.
Yep,
And
100%.
hard sets to failure or close to failure.
Hard sets in which the mind-muscle connection is maximized. Hard sets which are locally limited by the muscle itself. All of a sudden, compound alternating supersets look like they increase total work potentially, but who gives a shit? I'll tell you who gives a shit. Recreational fitness people that train 2 or 3 times a week have to get as much volume in as possible for all of those awesome benefits of the volume. Well, for those people, fuck, man, the only way to train is compound alternating supersets. Also, they save so much fucking time. It would be crazy. One of the things that pisses me off the most is you see people who are doing like, they're with a trainer. They're clearly in their 50s and they're female and they just want to look better, and they're doing like one arm rope rear delt flies and taking 3 minutes between sets. What the fuck is going on? That trainer's ripping you off. You could have been doing 10 CrossFit workouts back to back and gotten the body of your dreams by now, and all you're doing is wasting time. So it's one of those things where compound alternating supersets are amazing for general public, general fitness type of things, and for getting a great amount of overall fitness, which is, CrossFitters almost exclusively do compound alternating supersets in one way or the other. They're in the best shape in the world. But if you ask CrossFitters, hey, do more, I want you to get bigger for hypertrophy, what do they start doing? They start doing bodybuilding type shit where they rest longer and do focused muscle group training. There's probably a reason for that.
Cool. So, did you have anything to add to supersets? Did we even start with supersets?
No, we didn't start, but luckily supersets are a very short discussion. Supersets is when you do you do 2 sets. You do an isolation set and a compound set. The isolation set is designed to pre-exhaust the local muscle you're targeting, so that when you start the compound set immediately after, you have bought yourself more effective reps of targeting that muscle. So, for example, cable tricep pushdowns and push-ups. Normally, if you do push-ups, your chest gets tired, your triceps get tired, you may get 20 total reps, and the magnitude of stimulus to your chest and triceps is roughly equivalent, which means your triceps get some really good stimulus. But if your triceps are pretty strong, your chest might start to give out first, and then your technique breaks down. You really never get to push your triceps as far as they could possibly go. So close grip push-ups for you might not even be that great. Now hold on a second. Instead of just doing close grip push-ups, we do an exercise. We do a close to failure set of cable pushdowns. Okay, we do cable pushdowns to where our triceps are very fatigued locally. Systemically, we still feel fine because it's a very easy isolation exercise. As soon as we're done, we drop down and do as many push-ups as we can. Now we might be only doing 10 push-ups, but we're getting all 5 super effective reps at the end of those 10 push-ups, and even the first 5 reps are pretty fucking effective because your triceps are already super fatigued, super pumped, and locally are requiring way more motor unit activity than they otherwise would. So supersets like this, what are called pre-exhaust supersets, are really awesome for targeting muscles that just have a hard time targeting otherwise with compound movements. You want the benefits of compound movements for them, but you also want the benefits of essentially being able to extend a set beyond itself, beyond failure, so that you get more effective reps that way by using another muscle to power it. So in this case, our triceps are being pushed along even further by our pecs helping out, and they help out just enough to get that many more effective reps. It's a really, really awesome tool. It means that in a superset, here's a really cool revelation. In a superset, where you do pushdowns to close grip push-ups, for example, if you stop 2 reps shy of failure both times, you can get roughly 6 effective reps, right? Because you stop too short of failure on the first set and on the second set. How in the fuck are you supposed to get 6 effective reps with 1 set? You'd have to go to true failure. Right? That's very, very fatiguing. So with a superset, by using an isolation first and a compound second, you can actually do a lot of really nasty local stimulus to the target muscle, while your central fatigue is just not super high, and you can keep going like that and get a lot of volume in for the target muscle itself.
Great.
Yeah.
And finishing with BFR, I guess.
BFR is super fucking easy. What you do with BFR is you basically occlude the local musculature so that two things happen. One, metabolites really summate in the muscle, which potentially grows through the metabolite pathway directly. And two, you are fatiguing the local musculature so much that all of the motor units have to turn on to help that muscle continue to contract. So occlusion training is basically like taking central fatigue and peripheral fatigue and almost removing them to a large extent and being like, okay, the only limiting factor, the first limiting factor is going to be local fatigue. The upside to that is that you get really, really good, tons of effective reps. The downside is that sometimes your faster twitch fibers can fatigue so much they actually experience problems with excitation contraction coupling. You may be going to failure, but your faster twitch motor units may never be turning on because the neuromuscular junction is so heavily flooded with metabolites that it isn't even functioning hardly at all anymore. You just don't get really awesome peak contractions with occlusion training. That might be a downside. Occlusion training, I think it's now starting to look like occlusion training works pretty well for slower twitch fibers, the intermediate twitch ones, but maybe not the most amazing thing for the fastest of the fastest twitch, which I still contend probably work best with straight sets of 5 to 10 reps, right? But occlusion training super awesome because you can lose very, very light loads, 20 to 30% of 1RM. The the central fatigue is usually very low because the periphery so quickly becomes a limiting factor. And it's great because you can train body parts or muscle groups that are the ones around them have been injured, and you can't do straight sets because you can't put through that much tension through the whole body. So for example, if you hurt your shoulder and you can't do conventional bicep curls because they pull on your shoulder, you can do super tiny dumbbell curls and occlude your biceps, and all of a sudden you're getting decent training for your biceps. So what I would say is occlusion training is a really cool tool. I mostly save it for if I'm hurt or something like that, but you can incorporate it. The thing is, it only works with distal occlusion. It works really good for forearm training. It works really good for bicep and tricep training. It works really good for calf training. Works okay for quads. Doesn't do seemingly anything for hamstrings. And for all the other muscles, like you can't occlude your chest and back because that's, you're going to have to wrap the occlusion band around your throat for that one. So occlusion, yeah, there you go. Try it. There's anything to grow. So occlusion training is cool, but it's one of those things that also because your ability to clear lactate adapts so quickly, buffering ability adapts, that it only works for probably about 4 to 6 weeks really well. And after that, you have to do a shitload of sets to get it to do anything. And at that point, the central fatigue starts to be comparable to straight sets, and you start to ask yourself why you're not just doing straight sets.
Something that Eric Trexler and Greg Knuckles discussed on their podcast with Stronger by Science is they debated if there's even... Do you think there's a specific advantage to BFR over just normal low load, high rep training?
Yes, of course. The advantage is that you get more of the reps as a fraction, larger fraction of your reps over the multiple sets are effective reps. Right? Because occlusion training, by keeping the metabolite sequestered, by keeping your motor units pretty close to failure, means that every time you do an occlusion set, you might do 8 reps, whereas with normal high load or low load, you would do 16 reps. Does that help with training slower muscle fibers? No. So maybe if you want more intermediate, slower muscle fiber training, occlusion training may not be the way to do it. But because of the fatigue involved and the fastest fibers might not even turn on, it's still a really good way to do that. It definitely is a better way to do effective reps. So you could basically get a higher ratio of more effective reps to number of sets, or to total reps. And then that way they might have, occlusion might have a slight short-term advantage. And I would say, like, if you're going to do super high rep sets, you might as well try to occlude it because that could give you the sort of the best of both worlds.
Yes. Do you have time for one more question, which is, I
Yep,
think, a really short one. I
sure.
had the question of where actually to place those metabolite techniques in an overall macro cycle, but I think that will be that will be too much for today. Um, but I basically just want to ask if tracking a metabolite technique sets, is one set equal one normal set, or is there a more nuanced way of tracking the set numbers?
In the upcoming book, the hypertrophy book, we're going to have some shorthand as to how you can track it. That is really just our best, really shitty guess. Um, but I think that the best answer. So, like for example, I'm not sure. I'd have to look. I think we count if you're going to count sets. Counting pre-exhaust supersets as 1.5 sets is probably a good idea because if you like take a look at the number of total reps, it's like 1.5 sets worth. And because one of them is super easy isolation, and counting it for a full set might be a little bit erroneous, so on and so forth. But as not dogmatic, here's what you should do. You should count the supersets as supersets, Myo Reps as Myo Reps, and not try to equate them to normal sets because they're different in a bunch of different ways. When you start your program, you should start at the lower end of what you think you need and auto-regulate from there. So you have a count and you'll have a conversion by yourself. So for example, it's okay, on this normal session for biceps, I would normally do straight sets, but I'm going to do Myo Reps. How do I know if it's a good bicep session? Well, I get like effort perception is there, I get a little bit of a pump, and then I get maybe a little bit sore in the day after. Start with as many Myo Reps as it takes to get a really good, pretty decent pump. Stop. Next day, are you sore or not? If yes, cool, mission accomplished. If not at all sore and it feels like you could have kept going, then you know that you probably underdid it and could do more and still recover and still grow. So all of a sudden you come back and instead of doing 2 sets of Myo Reps, you do 4 sets. And then that gets you a little sore and they're like, aha, now we're in the money, right? So there's no direct conversion because there's a ton of factors to consider. Just start with something reasonable, assume that the conversion is relatively close to 1-to-1, and then let autoregulation take over. Because people say, like, well, how many sets do I count? Well, listen, exercises make set counting a very limited tool to begin with. Like if you compare barbell rows to cable rows, you could probably do 8 sets of barbell rows and die, or you can do 16 sets of cable rows and walk right out of the gym like nothing happened. So the stimulus to fatigue ratio for those is maybe similar, but the amount of stimulus and the amount of raw fatigue is probably bigger by double for bent rows for both of those. So when you say, gee, I can do 20 sets for back and that's my MRV, well, 20 sets of which exercise? You may be able to do just, cable straight arm pull downs and cable rows and do 35 sets and feel like a fucking, like a spring chicken. But you may be able to do, 16 sets of only barbell bent rows with a deficit and like shit blood the next week. So, people say like, well, what about Myo Reps versus straight sets? How do I count them? First question, how do you count one exercise versus the other? The answer is you can't count it. So what do? You do your best. You start with averages, and you every week auto-regulate your volume. Plain and simple. There's no way to get around that. Thus, to make a further critique of something that folks have sort of been doing, you don't start a program with 10 sets and then go to 12 and then go to 14, then go to 16, then end at 20. That's just an example. What you really do is you start a program at, let's say 10 sets. Based on how your responses are, how much of a pump you're getting, how much soreness you're getting, how much fatigue you're carrying, you increase or keep stable the number of sets as needed to continue to get a good response. And then that rise will be nonlinear until you hit MRV, and then you have to go down. Sometimes that'll be 18, sometimes it'll be 20, sometimes it's 26, depending on the kinds of exercises you choose and the kind of training stuff you do. And honestly, that's just my long-winded answer for I don't have the data to or understanding to recommend conversions for supersets, drop sets, Myo Reps, etc. That's anything more than a really shitty guess on my part.
Still love
it. It's good when people still love your shitty guesses.
So Mike, yeah, I think that was great, and I think to round things up, do you want to plug anything regarding your upcoming book? I think it's pretty much written, what I heard in Steve's podcast. So do you have any kind of date when it probably will will release? And do you have any kinds of upcoming seminars that you want to tell people about something?
We have a seminar in mid-October in Ireland, so we'll see you guys there. For folks in the United States, RP's own first seminar in Philadelphia is coming up in November. Korea, I don't know if you have any Korean viewers, we have a Korea seminar coming up in late September. I will also be with Jared Feather walking around in the Olympia Expo this year, so we'll see you guys at the Olympia. If you see me there, just come up and say hi, because I promise I'm super friendly in real life. And that's it.
Not
and as
true.
far as well, to you I'm not friendly, because I demand more of you. I'm sharpening you like a sword, Jan, with excessive violence in person.
Yep,
But
that's true.
yeah, and then the book should come out next year. But before that, we are updating the muscle building guides on the RP Hypertrophy Hub. And
Oh boy.
currently, each muscle building guide is 15 pages long. And there'll probably be 15 to 20 pages when we're done. In about a month, we're going to be releasing the first body part guide. Chad Wesley Smith and I are going to be making new videos for a bunch of different topics, mini videos, 5-minute long, 10-minute long videos for hypertrophy stuff. A lot of stuff coming up, so just stay glued to the YouTube and the RP's website, and good things will happen.
Which is the first body part that will ever come out?
Yeah, I don't know. That's actually my choice. Nick Shaw says I should save the super awesome body parts for later, for close to when the book is coming out, to make people excited. I actually read you all of the body parts in order of how I'm making them. Back, biceps, abs, calves, chest, forearms by popular demand. Front delts, glutes, hamstrings, quads, rear delts, side delts, traps, and triceps. So, I don't know. I don't know. Who knows? We might start with back. It would be kind of lame if we started with like calves, abs, or forearms. Although forearms people have been excited about because there's no guides for them.
I don't really get it, to be honest.
I don't either, man. One of the ones I get all the time is like, when are you going to make a neck training guide? The answer is never. For
Watch
two
Jeff
reasons.
Nippert.
Right. One, Jeff Nippard's knocked that shit out of the park. I can't do a better job than that. And two, do I look like I need a bigger neck? Holy fuck. Like, folks, when you get a bigger neck, the only thing that happens is you get sleep apnea. I promise. Nothing cool happens. So, also, when you get a bigger neck, I don't know, man. It kind of makes the rest of you look smaller. So, fuck that, Like, I don't know.
I heard it makes you look better in clothes.
Great. Those people, I don't know. I guess I'm just spoiled with a big neck already, so you're
Yeah,
kind of.
I mean, look at my neck and look at your neck.
You look great. Your neck looks just fine.
So, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time again and being
My
on the
pleasure.
podcast again. It was great.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yes. I wish you a great day.
Thank you.
Bye bye.